Today is Wednesday, April 13th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. My wife asked me today if I would take some time to talk about this situation that's developing with inflation in the United States. Could be a temporary problem, could be a lasting problem. But my wife was mentioning how prices in supermarkets, just in her weekly shopping, she sees significant changes in prices, and she knows that this can become a real source of concern for other parents, especially younger parents. And she asked if I would talk a little bit about how Catholic parents should respond to this issue with inflation. When we were first married, I took a lot of time to talk with my wife about rules for how our family was going to operate. I used the military term SOPs, standard operating procedures, to talk about how things needed to get done. And it wasn't because I had a desire to have some kind of micromanaging control over everything, but I wanted our family to be free to be able to do important things, and I didn't want us to be taken down by all kinds of silly problems that could easily be avoided. I wanted us to make sure that we always kept the main thing as the main thing, and I didn't want any distractions. I didn't want any avoidable problems. I didn't want anything that would hinder us from pursuing a devout and active Christian life. And I knew that in order to do those things, the source of the problems that keep many families from doing those things are not the major decisions in life, but it's the little everyday stuff and how it gets done that becomes a source of trouble and distraction and waste, like having a million microscopic holes in a boat that constantly leak and cause the boat to sink. All of these little everyday problems that seem insignificant, but when multiplied over weeks and months and years, radically affect family life. And one of the things I told my wife when we first got married was that we're never going to use coupons. We're never going to do the supermarket sales shopping and all of this nonsense that women do. We watched as women in our church and women we knew, even growing up, spent so much time cutting coupons, running to the store, going to different stores, using their coupons, looking for deals, and coming home with a constantly changing collection of products based on what happened to be on sale at any given time. And I told my wife, we're not going to live like that. She's not going to spend her time doing that. We're not going to cut coupons. We're not going to be running around looking for deals or buying things that happen to be on sale. We're going to establish a family diet, a family schedule, a family wardrobe, and we're simply going to buy the things that we need at their normal price. We're not going to worry about sales or anything else. We should have only the things that we need, and if we need them, the price shouldn't concern us because they're necessities. And so we've always lived a very simple life with high quality products, high quality clothing and so on, but only the things that we need. The basics for a basic diet, the basics for a classic wardrobe, and we don't concern ourselves with changing prices or things like that. The problem, the opposite mentality, is what I refer to as the Walmart mentality. The Walmart mentality in America, if you think about the motto at Walmart, it's more for less. You can have more, you can get more for less money. And this Walmart culture has become the way that many Catholic families, Christian families think about buying things. They live according to this Walmart principle, this Walmart mentality. I'd like to be able to get more and more if I can afford it. I'd like to have this and that and this and that, and maybe we'll get one of those if we could afford it or if it was cheap enough. So we don't have a swimming pool, but if Walmart could get a swimming pool for us down into the $100 range, well, then we'll buy a swimming pool. And that's the idea. It's all of this junk that people collect because Walmart or Amazon find a way to bring it down into the price range of the average American family. And so we're all buying junk because Walmart has found a way to make it cheap. Things that we would never need in a million years. And instead of having a few high quality things, buying fewer things of a high quality and not concerning ourselves with the price because our overall expenses are limited by the fact that we only buy what we need. Instead, we're buying cheap stuff all the time, throwing discounted stuff in the cart every time we go to the store, thinking about getting things that we would never need or list as needs because they're on sale. And that mentality seems innocent. It seems innocent because there's nothing wrong with saving money. There's nothing wrong with, quote unquote, getting a good deal and so on. But when we enter a situation like we're in now, we see what's wrong with that mentality. All of a sudden, we see Christian families who don't live simple lives. They don't have established budgets. They don't have an established weekly family diet. They don't have an established family wardrobe. They don't have a small number of quality things that they purchase because they're necessities. They've lived trusting that Walmart would continue to make all of this junk available cheap. Their whole life has been organized around the assumption that stuff is cheap, that gas is cheap, that cars are cheap, that clothes bought here or here or here on sale, if you use this coupon, if you go at this time, are cheap, and so on. Modern families live out of Walmart, they live out of dollar stores, they live out of thrift stores, and so on, picking up all kinds of stuff that they don't need but get because it's cheap. And now we find ourselves in the face of an inflation crisis, and Christians are going to have a hard time figuring out what to do because they've lived this loose, careless, coupon cutting, bargain hunting lifestyle, and now all of a sudden prices are running up on everything. When I was a kid, my grandparents on my father's side of the family grew up in rural West Virginia. They were farmers. My grandparents on my mother's side of the family grew up in Jersey City. They were urban. My entire life growing up, I heard my maternal grandmother, the grandmother from Jersey City, constantly complaining about the Great Depression, constantly talking about how poor they were, how they had no money for anything, how they had to sell their school pencils to get money for food, constantly talking about the Great Depression. My paternal grandparents, the ones from rural West Virginia, never in my life mentioned the Great Depression. The Great Depression had nothing to do with their life. They lived out on the farm. They lived a simple life. They worked. They had what they needed. They were content with simple things. Never talked about the Great Depression. Never talked about such a financial crisis. Never talked about it. My paternal grandparents, those from West Virginia, were always well dressed. They were always healthy and active. They were always working. They were always happy into their 90s. Always happy. My grandfather, I talk about him quite a lot because he was one of the most important people in my life. I remember my grandfather when I would visit his house, because I would stay there quite a bit, because I loved my grandparents. I would stay at my grandfather's house, and when he was hungry, he would take a plate out of the kitchen, walk out the back door, and go out into the garden. And a few minutes later, he'd come back into the house with a plate full of vegetables. And I remember watching my grandfather sit down at the table with some salt and pepper and eat a plate of vegetables that he took out of his garden. That was my grandfather. That was my grandmother on my father's side of the family. Nothing affected them. They were always happy. They always had simple things. And to me, they seemed like wealthy people because they always had what they needed. They always took care of us. They always had the things that were necessary, and they lived with a high quality of life. On the other hand, my maternal grandparents, the ones who grew up in Jersey City, were the opposite. They were the ones constantly looking for coupons, constantly talking about money, constantly talking about dollar store discounts and bargains and garage sales and everything else, constantly hustling, constantly looking for deals, constantly coming home with just any junk that they found and quote unquote got a good deal on. They were overweight, they were unhealthy, they were always unhappy and discontented, and they seemed like they never had anything. Even though if we would look, we would find that they had as much cash as my other grandparents. But their way of life was a poor person's way of life. A dissipated, wasteful, careless, unprincipled, disorganized way of life. Whereas my other grandparents, their life was natural, simple, orderly. And like I said, I always felt like my paternal grandparents were wealthy because they enjoyed a high quality of life, even though they never had any money. They just had a higher quality of life. The bargain hunting life is an unprincipled life. If you really think about it, what is the directing principle? What is the guiding principle of the bargain hunting life? It's not time, because time is wasted looking for coupons. Time is wasted running around from store to store. Saving time is not the principle of that bargain hunting life. Health is not the principle of that bargain hunting life. Religion and virtue is not the principle of that bargain hunting life, because the bargain hunters rarely talk about how prices are made lower. The only principle that we can find in the bargain hunting, coupon cutting life is a desire for money. Money is the only principle. A thing is a good deal or a bad deal based on how much it costs. A thing is put in the cart or left out of the cart based simply on how much it costs. Something is brought home or not brought home because of how much it costs. There's no principle. There's no plan for life. There's no culture. There's no philosophy. It's just this constant scrounging and hustling and trying to grab as much as possible for the least amount of money. And the people who live that way are always poor. They always appear poor. They always have things they shouldn't have. They always live in the midst of a mess because there's so much junk around them that they've brought home that they shouldn't have in the first place. And it's an unhappy life. And when a situation like we're facing today, or like the Great Depression comes along, their whole life is turned upside down and made miserable because the value of money goes down. Things get more expensive, and the whole principle of their life is turned upside down. And like I said, my other grandparents who lived a natural, principled, peaceful life, content with necessary things, food, clothing, a nice home, transportation, with a focus always on doing productive, useful work. They never lack anything, and their life always appears to be at peace. There are many different principles at work in their life. There are natural principles. They live in harmony with the natural world. Like I said, my grandfather and grandmother on my father's side, even though they grew up as farmers and lived in West Virginia, they eventually moved up to New Jersey, but they lived like a farm family in New Jersey. Their work simply changed from work in the fields and in the gardens to work in factories. My grandfather still took care of all of his equipment, all of his automobiles, had his workshop and tools, and worked in a factory just like he had formerly worked on the farm. He had the same life, same principles, same culture, same quality of life, same focus on necessary things, and he lived at peace, living a simple life right in the midst of New Jersey, central New Jersey, where we grew up. And like I said, my other side of the family, always in chaos, always talking about shopping, stores, discounts, showing what they brought home, showing what they got a deal on, always unhealthy, always poor, always in stores, always shopping, never working, never really doing anything useful. And I grew up seeing those two lives in my grandparents. And those are the two different kinds of lives that families choose to live. And as I said, when I was married, I told my wife, not thinking about my grandparents, but maybe that's really the source of where those ideas and desires came from in me. I wanted to live a simple, natural life. I wanted to have a family diet where we ate simple meals that were routine. I told my wife, I don't want this talk about variety, this digging through cookbooks, looking for constantly changing meal ideas. I just want the same handful of healthy, sustainable, or even producible meals that we could prepare, whether we lived in a suburb or in a rural area. I wanted a simple diet. I wanted a simple, classic wardrobe for my life's work. And I told my wife that if we have a responsible schedule and routine for our Christian life, that should determine what we wear. It should make our wardrobe simple. If we have a simple, orderly routine for our life, that should allow us to have orderly meals and not be running all over the place trying to pick up food as we run around, but we should have orderly meal preparation, meal storage, times for meals, and so on. And I presented my wife with the rule of St. Benedict as a model of that simplicity. And I said, look at this. Look at the rule of St. Benedict. Look at what he says. He teaches that there should be one meal a day, and that the meal should be simple based on the seasons of the year and what's available fresh at each time of the year. If we have gardens and produce our own fruits and vegetables, we can eat according to the seasons. There's no need for all of this crazy shopping and food storage and things like that. There will always be fresh food available. And if we can't produce our own food, we should still eat what we might produce. And that led to the development of a principle that I taught a few years ago when I was writing about household management and farming. I called it the Self-Sufficiency Principle. And I said that families should seek to use what they can produce, whether they can produce it at present or might produce it in the future. They should use what they could produce, and then they should work over time to produce what they use. I'll say that one more time in case it was not clear. Families should use what they could produce, and they should work to produce what they then use. I used to refer to that as the principle of self-sufficiency, sort of a cycle. You begin not by trying to grow your own food and all this stuff, because that may never be possible. You begin by choosing to use things that could be produced. And then you work, starting small and working patiently, you work to produce the things that you use and make yourself independent of the stores and competitive market for your basic necessities. And that's how we started our family life when we were married. And now, 24 years later, there have been points in our life where we were completely self-sufficient. There was one time where I posted a photo of an empty, unplugged refrigerator because our farm was producing so much food that we didn't even need to store food anymore. And that comes and goes with different events and phases of life, but still the principle is the same. We eat the same things, whether there's tons of money coming in at a given time or whether there's barely any money coming in. We can always afford quality products if we stick to what's necessary. But it's the nickel and dime stuff, what I used to call penny pleasures, that multiplied over 30 days every month add up to hundreds of dollars. I used to tell my children, if you were to stop at the store and buy a $3 drink every day, let's say a coffee beverage or some kind of tasty drink, and it cost, let's say, $3. That doesn't seem like much until you multiply it by 30 days in a month, and then you've got a $90 a month expense for nothing. You have nothing to show for it at the end of the month. $90 a month. And we do that all over the place. We do that nickel and dime spending, penny pleasures all over, and they multiply by 30 days a month, 12 months a year. The next thing we know, after a few years, we've spent several $1,000s on absolutely nothing. And so it's not the major costs of the necessities of life that actually affect our quality of life. It's a lack of discipline, lack of simplicity, and a dissipation of the resources that we have, time that we have, money that we have, and so on, picking up all kinds of little things here and there, filling the house with all kinds of junk that we found at a discounted price. And then by the next thing we know, some trouble comes along. We lose a job, some economic problem arises, and all of a sudden we're stuck for money, and we can't figure out how to obtain our necessities. And we look around as if something terrible has happened. But the money that we did have, we wasted. And if we look around, the house is full of all kinds of junk that we should never have purchased or brought home in the first place. And so when we look at this quote-unquote crisis developing in our society, we can see that it's going to cause panic among the Walmart crowd. It's going to cause panic among the coupon cutters and the bargain hunters, because now the lifestyle that they've lived, which has only been possible because of low prices, all of a sudden that plan doesn't work anymore. A gallon of milk is no longer $2, now it's $4. Well, that changes everything, especially if you have a large family. And we multiply this by every product across the board, from socks and underwear to milk and bread, all the way up the chain of supplies. And we've got a real problem. The way to deal with the problem is to get out of that mentality and stop managing our households according to this Walmart mentality, and learn to go and look at a simple rule of life, like the rule of St. Benedict, where we focus on determining what we need to do in our life, establishing a routine schedule by which we get done our necessary tasks. And our necessary tasks don't mean 1,000,001 ways to organize the clutter in your house, 1,001 tricks how to clean all of the stuff that's sitting around your kitchen. All of that business of caring for your possessions is part of the problem. We weren't created for that kind of work. We have to focus on the actual mission of our life and reorient our life around the main thing. Of course, that manifests itself in different ways in our lives. For my family, it's by working in education. When I wake up in the morning, I want to think about my work in education. I want to work at it all day long, and I want to stop working at it and stop thinking about it when it's time for me to go to bed at night. And my wife lives and works with me with that same mentality, that same focus on the main thing. What we eat for dinner is determined by what we have to do today. And what we have to do today is determined by a life mission that's focused and simple. What I wear today is determined by my life's work. And so this life is simple and focused and orderly. You'll notice if you watch my teaching videos, I always have the same outfits on. You may notice that all of a sudden one day the shirt looks new or the pants look new, but they're the same pants, the same shirt, and I've been dressing the same way for 20 plus years. When something starts to get worn out, we simply replace it from the same catalog, from the same supplier. We don't even look at the price. We just reorder it because it's all that we buy. We're not walking around the mall looking for deals, filling closets with discounts. We just keep the same wardrobe, the same simple pieces of clothing that we need for our lives, and we simply reorder them, not worrying about what they cost, focusing on quality. And we just don't have these problems. And that's my advice. My advice is to take this economic crisis that is developing and use it as an opportunity to think twice about how you manage your life, think twice about how you run your household, and use it as an opportunity to eliminate a problem that at a time like this reveals its true nature. When prices are low, we can get away with these things. But that's not how saints and wise men teach us to live. They don't teach the garage sale mentality. They don't teach the Walmart mentality. They teach simplicity and high quality of necessary things. And that's what beautiful culture really is. Fewer things and better things, not lots of cheap junk that happens to be on sale. Now, if you're able to live and get yourself reordered according to such a principle, you'll find that this talk of inflation really doesn't affect your life. Sure, costs will go up a little bit, but they'll go up for everybody. And because you're not shopping every day or every week or even every month, that's not how you manage purchasing your family's supplies, you're not going to be talking about prices day by day or week by week. If prices change on a monthly basis, you may notice. It may be significant. But most of the time, you won't even notice. Problems will start up in a few weeks, they'll go away, or even in a few months, they'll go away, and you'll find that it hardly affected anything you did. Because you're not sitting, hovering over the sales papers, hovering over the websites, staring at the front windows of the stores as you drive past, wandering around in the malls, looking at price tags. You don't live that way. You're focused on your life's work, and the economic crises that come and go will rarely have an effect on anything you do. So, just to respond to this issue, because my wife asked me to, I want to share that this kind of financial crisis that affects shopping and buying really only affects the people who have built a life with the assumption that they can buy all kinds of junk and it will always be cheap. Those are the people affected by this inflation crisis, this whole consumer culture, Walmart culture, now Amazon culture. Rather than try to deal with the problem of inflation or come up with 1,001 ways to keep saving money or to keep finding deals, what we should realize is this approach to household management is a dead end, and we need to get out of it, to back up and get on a right road before we get trapped and it's too late to fix things. So I hope that's helpful. God bless.